Welcome to Scott, Mississippi, a place once marked on 19th century maps as a freedmen's settlement, then erased. No fire recorded, no flood, no war. Yet by 1901, every home, every name, every heartbeat was gone. They called it progress, but what remained was silence, and a low hum that still rises from beneath the cotton fields when the wind passes through. Some say it's the sound of the soil breathing. Others say it's the song of those who never left. Before we begin, leave a comment where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening. Tell me if you've ever stood somewhere that felt empty, but not alone. Because in Scott, Mississippi, that feeling never left. In the archives of Washington County, there's a ledger, brittle water-stained, half unreadable. The ink fades halfway through the year 1873. Names of families cross-listed as freed laborers, wages unpaid, promises pending. The final entry reads, "Settlement dissolved, cause unknown." No explanation, no continuation, just a line like a grave without a marker. Yet the ground here seems unwilling to forget. On summer nights, when the air thickens with honeysuckle and heat, some still claim to hear footsteps, bare feet pressing through dust, and a woman's voice calling children by names that no one remembers. During the 1930s, the WPA interviewers came through the Delta, collecting the memories of those who had lived through the first Reconstruction. They spoke to an old man, 92, who remembered the settlement that once stood here. He said they built the cabins again after freedom. Built them where the fields still bled. But the night didn't change. The wind still belonged to somebody else. That was all he said. Then he fell silent, as if even remembering might awaken something that should remain asleep. Stories of Scott lived on, only in fragments. Half-remembered hymns, warnings whispered to children, maps with smudged edges. People spoke of lights floating where the church once stood, of a road that led nowhere, of a silence so thick that even the crickets refused to sing. But this isn't only a ghost story. It's a record of erasure. Because between every census line and missing document lies a truth this nation rarely names, that whole black towns were born from freedom and buried by fear. Scott was one of them. According to Freedmen's Bureau correspondence dated March 1872, the settlement had 63 families, a schoolhouse, a small chapel, and a cooperative cotton association under black management. Within a single year, those reports stopped. By 1874, the Bureau itself was dismantled, and with it the memory of the people it once protected. Between those 2 years, 1872 and 1874, history simply goes dark. Some say a levee broke, though no flood was recorded. Others whisper of riders at midnight, but no reports, no trials, no graves. And then there are the older voices, the ones carried in hymns, who say the land itself took them. That one July night, the air turned cold, the song from the chapel bent into a cry, and when dawn came, the cabins were empty. A WPA field note mentions an old woman known as Aunt Cora, who refused to leave even after the last families vanished. She sang the same hymn every dusk, saying it kept the ghosts working, not wandering. When asked what she meant, she smiled. Work don't stop just 'cause the living done quit. That winter her cabin burned. The cause once again unknown. History forgets what doesn't fit its frame. It forgets the silence between two hymns, the names that were never written, the miles of earth that once held laughter and prayer. What remains now is the air, the soil, the ache. Mississippi, 1872. The war had ended, at least that's what the papers said. The gunfire had faded, the flags had changed, and the new word on everyone's tongue was freedom. But freedom came softly here, not with a trumpet, not with a march, just a tremor in the air like something uncertain trying to be born. The Delta was still heavy with mud and memory. The smell of burnt cotton hung where plantations once roared with profit. Every morning the mist rolled low over the fields, veiling the stumps of what used to be empire. The freedmen came back to this land, some walking barefoot for days, following the same roads they once walked in chains. They carried what little they had, a quilt, a tin pot, a Bible with no cover. They said they were coming home. But what they found was a place that didn't know how to recognize them anymore. Cabins left to rot, fences, collapsed white fields, stretching out in silence. Still they stayed because leaving meant wandering again. And they had wandered enough. They built the new Scott, slowly plank by plank, hymn by hymn. Wooden cabins rose along the creek, each one facing east to meet the sun. The men dug wells, the women planted sweet potatoes where cotton used to grow. On Sundays they gathered beneath an oak tree that leaned just so, its branches wide enough to cast a shade that felt like forgiveness. Beneath it they sang. Songs half prayer, half memory. The kind passed down by those who had no books but knew every word by heart. At dusk the world turned amber. Smoke from their fires curled into the air, soft and steady. Somewhere a baby cried, somewhere else someone laughed. The sound carried across the flat land, echoing against the river levee. It was the sound of a people stitching themselves back together, one meal, one prayer, one plank at a time. And yet under that fragile peace, something dark lingered. Reconstruction was a promise written in ink that never dried. The soldiers had come Union blue fading to gray, some still posted in nearby towns, but even they looked tired, unsure of what they were protecting anymore. The Freedmen's Bureau agents came, 2 notebooks in hand, making tallies of wages, births, disputes. On paper, progress was measured in numbers: how many acres, how many schools, how many freed families settled. But behind those numbers were faces. And behind those faces, fear, because just beyond the reach of lantern light, there were still men on horseback, faces hidden beneath hoods, watching from the tree line. They rode by night, carrying silence like a weapon. No one said their name out loud to speak, it was to summon them. So the people of Scott prayed instead. Prayed that the next night would pass quiet, that their children would wake to the same dawn. The days pressed on. The schoolhouse opened a small cabin with a dirt floor and 1 cracked slate board. The teacher was a young woman from Ohio, pale hands, trembling voice, brave enough to stay. The freedmen called her Miss Clara. She wrote the alphabet on the board, her chalk dust mingling with the heat. And when she looked at her students, children barefoot, eyes wide hungry to learn, she said softly, "This is what freedom sounds like." In the fields, the work never stopped. Cotton still grew, but this time the harvest belonged, at least partly, to those who picked it. Sharecropping, they called it. A word that promised partnership, but delivered only debt. The white landowners smiled, signed papers, and waited. The freedmen bent their backs again, believing this time it was their own choice. But every fall the math came back wrong. The prices too low, the debts too high. The dream shrinking with every tally. Still hope lived in small things. The creak of a rocking chair. The laughter after supper, the rustle of pages when someone learned to read a verse aloud. Hope in the taste of cold water after a long day, in the sound of children playing near the church steps. They called that church New Light. It was nothing more than 4 walls of pine and a cross hammered from scrap iron. But when they sang, it sounded like a cathedral. Every Saturday, Miss Clara and the elders met there to plan the week school schedules, crop shares, repairs. And every Sunday after the sermon, someone would stand and testify, not about miracles, but about endurance, about what it meant to still be here, about what it meant to build something new on soil that remembered chains. Then came the summer storms. The delta sky could turn from gold to black in a breath. Rain fell in sheets, wind howled through the trees, the cabins shook like paper. Some said the storms carried the voices of the dead soldiers, slaves, masters alike, all tangled in the same thunder. When the rain stopped, steam rose from the fields, and the air smelled of iron and salt. It was as if the land was trying to cleanse itself, but the stain went too deep. As the months passed, the world outside Scott began to turn cold again. Reconstruction was faltering. The federal agents stopped coming. The bureau offices closed one by one. Newspapers up north said the South was healing, but those here knew better. They could feel the shift, a tightening, a waiting. Freedmen who spoke too boldly found their barns burned. Teachers who refused to leave were threatened. The word progress began to sound like a curse whispered in reverse. And yet, in the middle of that slow unraveling, there was still the music. You could hear it at dusk, men humming while they mended fences, women singing over washboards, the soft pulse of drums in the distance. It was rhythm, as resistance melody as memory. Every note carried the same secret: we are still here. If you had stood in Scott, Mississippi in those years just before it vanished, you might have believed the town would last forever. The children ran barefoot through the fields, chasing the glow of fireflies. Miss Clara's chalkboard glimmered faintly in the lamplight. The chapel bells rang across the river, clear and defiant. The scent of smoke bread and sweat hung in the air, real human alive. But history moves like water, slow, patient, merciless. And somewhere between the songs and the silence between the oak and the levee, the tide began to change. Records stopped. Letters went unanswered. Footprints faded from the dirt paths. All that remains now are fragments, a burned nail, a broken comb, the outline of a foundation swallowed by grass. But if you listen closely, if you stand still when the sun falls low, you can almost hear it, the sound of a town breathing in memory. That was Scott, born from the ashes of Reconstruction, built by hands that refused to be forgotten, and swallowed quietly by history that never came back to finish the story. The story of Scott, Mississippi does not begin with silence. It begins with ink. Ink that once flowed steady across the pages of the Freedmen's Bureau reports, the county ledgers. The tax registries now faded, now torn, now eaten by mildew and time. In 1872, the Bureau recorded the establishment of a colored settlement cooperative in nature self-sustaining under church guidance. The phrasing is stiff bureaucratic, but behind it you can feel the pulse of something living. 63 families, 2 elders elected as trustees, 1 teacher under federal contract, a small cotton cooperative pooling profits to buy seed and tools, a schoolhouse of rough pine 30 feet wide dirt floor, and a pulpit made from a wagon plank. All of it documented in cursive, neat and fragile, the handwriting of men who believed that paper could preserve a dream. But by 1873, the handwriting stops. The ledger ends mid-sentence, distribution to freed families. Then nothing. The ink fades to gray. The line trembles and disappears. On the next page, blank space, a silence thick as the Delta fog. No signature, no closing date, no final seal. The bureau clerk who kept that record is unknown. His name scratched out on later copies, perhaps intentionally. In Jackson, a second record survives, a bureau circular marked received July 1872. It references trouble along the levee road between Greenville and Scott. The nature of that trouble is never defined. A single phrase is underlined: unrest among colored laborers, rumors of night riders. Beneath it, another hand has written in faint pencil, no official action taken. That's where the trail begins to darken. Because to follow the story of Scott through paper alone is to follow a ghost. One document contradicts another. The county maps from 1871 list the settlement clearly Scott's Landing. By 1875, the name is gone. The area is simply Marsh No. 7. When the Bureau was dissolved that same year, its records were packed into wooden crates and shipped to Washington. Some arrived, others never did. Flood damage, mislabeling, or perhaps the quiet hand of someone who wished certain pages would vanish. One letter preserved in the National Archives was written by a missionary teacher. perhaps the same Miss Clara remembered in folklore. Dated December 1872, it reads, "The people are eager to learn. We have 42 children now, and more each week. They work in the fields and come to lessons by candlelight. They sing as they learn, and their songs carry far into the fields. There is peace here, though we hear of unrest upriver. I pray that our quiet days continue." Her handwriting is delicate looping. Her signature reads, Clara D. The Bureau's response is attached, dated March 1873. "We commend your service. Conditions unstable in region. Funds for supplies delayed." After that, no more letters. In the county courthouse, the 1874 tax rolls list 24 parcels of land under colored ownership. The following year, only 5 remain. Some sold under duress, others seized for non-payment of debt. The handwriting on those records changes thicker strokes, a different clerk. At the bottom of one page, a faint annotation reads, "Title disputed property reclaimed by prior owner." There is no signature. Fact written by hand can lie by omission. In 1938, a WPA field worker named Harold Fincher tried to trace the old settlement for his report on Negro folk traditions of the lower Delta. He visited the Levee Road, interviewed surviving families, collected their songs. In his notes, he writes, "Locals speak of the vanished town of Scott location, uncertain. Some say it stood near the sycamore grove. Others point east toward the bayou. No visible ruins, though one foundation of brick found near Creek Bend." He drew a small map, dotted lines, arrows, a question mark. Next to it, he scribbled, "All official maps omit name after 1875. Asked county clerk, no record. Oh. And then in a margin, almost lost to time, a final line. One elder woman, Cora Mayfield, claims her mother saw lights on the water the night the town died. Says they were not lanterns, too steady, too bright. The historian's voice disappears here, replaced by whispers and speculation, the line between evidence and echo blurring. In the early 20th century, the Delta grew crowded again. New railroads, new towns, new owners. The soil that once held Scott's cabins became part of a larger plantation tract under a man named J.T. Hollis. His descendants still hold the deed. The earliest version of that deed, dated 1903, includes an unusual notation: land formerly occupied, cleared and abandoned, no extant structures. The phrase "formerly occupied" is underlined twice. Abandoned by whom, it does not say. When historians look back on Reconstruction, they tend to speak in broad strokes: acts, amendments, statistics. But here in Scott, the truth lies in absences. The missing years between 1872 and 1875. The burned cabin that left no report, the erased name on the county map. Was it flood violence, fear, bureaucratic neglect? Each possibility leaves its own mark. Yet none fully explains why 63 families could vanish without record, without trace, without even a rumor in the press. The Greenville Gazette, July 1873, carried a brief item under local affairs. Colored laborers report disturbances near the levee. Authorities dismiss the matter, and that's all. One line wedged between crop prices and church notices. The disturbance never followed up, the silence never broken. Still, history leaves fingerprints faint but stubborn. In 1984, archaeologists from Jackson State conducted a soil survey along the levee tract. Beneath layers of silt, they found fragments, square nails, pottery shards, a rusted hinge. Nothing spectacular, but the kind of debris left by homes, not by fields. The report notes possible evidence of short-term habitation, circa late 19th century. The site was logged as Delta Unit 12. Its coordinates align almost exactly with the old postal route to Scott's Landing. So the town was real as the sweat and breath that built it. What happened to it? That's where fact ends and something else begins. Every vanished community leaves behind a pattern. The pattern of Scott matches others. Promise, growth, silence. The same handwriting that documented progress also signed its erasure. Freedmen's Bureau reports from neighboring counties tell identical stories. Small settlements built by the newly freed thriving briefly, then swallowed by debt, intimidation, or the quiet machinery of land law. But there is something about Scott that refuses to stay buried. Its name keeps surfacing in songs, in letters and dreams. A pattern of haunting that transcends the document. Perhaps that's why the WPA field workers lingered there longer than they planned. Fincher's notebook ends with one more entry undated. Visited site again at dusk. Air still heavy. Heard what sounded like a hymn, no source visible. My guide, a local boy, said they still sing for Miss Clara. I asked who he meant. He said, "You know the one who taught us to spell freedom." Fact ends there. The page turns blank. And maybe that's where history lives now. Not in ink, not in numbers, but in that space between what's proven and what's remembered. In the gap where a bureau clerk stopped writing, where the schoolhouse burned, where a teacher's letter went unanswered. That gap is where the real Scott breathes unseen, uncounted, but not gone. Because paper can burn, ink can fade, but memory, once it hums, never truly goes silent. Morning in Scott began before the sun rose, before the sky turned from ink to pale gray, before the roosters cried. The world woke quietly here slow, like an old song returning to the throat. A thin mist clung to the fields, soft as breath. The cabins, low and crooked, shimmered faintly through it, ghost-like, half-real in the morning haze. Smoke drifted from cooking fires. The smell of wood ash, boiled greens, and damp earth mixed together the smell of survival. Inside one cabin, a woman stirred. Her name, written once in a bureau record, was Eliza Carter, though most in the settlement just called her Miss Liza. Her hands were rough, cracked from washwater burned by the iron pot she kept over the fire. She'd been born a slave in Yazoo County, freed by war, widowed by hunger. In her cabin hung a small scrap of paper, a receipt for her freedom, folded and refolded until it felt like cloth. Every morning she touched it once, not to read it, but to remember that she existed beyond someone's claim. Beside her, her son Samuel slept, 9 years old, bare-armed, thin. He dreamed of the new schoolhouse. He'd been there 3 times, tracing letters in the dirt, while Miss Clara whispered their sounds. He loved the letter S. It curled like a snake and felt like power. He said once, "If I can spell my name, can nobody take it from me?" When the rooster called, Liza rose. She tied her headscarf, poured water from the bucket, and whispered a line she said every day, "Lord, let me see light." Outside, the sky began to glow slow and gold. The fields waited endless, heavy quiet. By 6, the men had already gathered near the road. Wooden plows creaked, mules shifted. The earth underfoot was soft, rich, the kind of soil that swallowed sweat and memory both. Liza walked with the other women babies tied to their backs, heading to the cotton rows. They laughed as they went, short bursts of sound, cutting through the morning stillness. One woman, Ada, started a tune, half hymn, half field song. Others joined low and strong. Oh, the land, remember. Every foot that fall, every soul that wander. Lord, still count them all. The rhythm steadied their steps. Every pull of the sack, every breath, every pause between words carried the same unspoken promise: we are still here. Around mid-morning, the sun climbed. The mist burned away. Heat came fast, pressing down on every surface, making the air shimmer. The cotton rose, blurred white, stretching like an ocean. From a distance, it looked peaceful. Up close, it was work that broke the body slowly, silent, constant, unforgiving. Children ran along the fence lines, gathering fallen bowls. Miss Clara's voice drifted faintly from the schoolhouse, where she'd opened the door wide for air. A, B, C. She called, and the children echoed her laughter, tangled with effort. For many, this was the first time words had shape. Some still called her teacher lady, not knowing any other title for someone who held knowledge like light. At noon, the bell from New Light Chapel rang, once a hollow sound that carried far. Liza straightened, wiped her hands on her apron, and looked toward the chapel. For a moment, she thought of her husband, gone since 1868, when he left to find work upriver and never returned. Sometimes she told Samuel his father was still walking home through the fields, just taking a long road. Other times, when the nights were too quiet, she said nothing at all. They ate lunch in the shade of the oak cornbread, a bit of molasses water warm from the bucket. The men spoke softly about the next harvest, about debts, about news from Greenville. One of them mentioned seeing riders 2 nights before lanterns near the levee horses, moving without sound. No one replied. Someone changed the subject. The children laughed again, and the silence folded back into the rhythm of the day. By afternoon, the fields glowed under a white haze. The women sang again, not to pass time, but to keep courage steady. The songs weren't written anywhere they lived, only in the mouths that carried them. They were hymns stitched with code lullabies filled with history. Each verse carried memory of ships of chains of names whispered in the dark. When dusk fell, the fields cooled. A slow wind rose, carrying the scent of water and smoke. The workers returned to their cabins, shoulders slumped but eyes still alive. Liza lit the lamp, its glow flickering against the rough walls. Samuel sat by her side, tracing letters in ash, S-A-M. He smiled when she nodded. Then he whispered, "Mama, when I grow up, I'm gonna build us a house that don't leak when it rains." Liza smiled too, but her eyes turned away. She'd learned not to trust tomorrow too much. That night they gathered at the chapel. The bell rang again, 3 slow notes. The benches were rough, splintered, uneven. Miss Clara stood at the front, reading from a torn Bible. She spoke softly about light, about faith, about what it means to be remembered. Her voice trembled, but her eyes burned steady. Outside, lightning flickered far off, lighting the sky like torn paper. After the reading, the singing began, slow at first, then rising. No instruments, just voices, hundreds of them, layered like waves. Men's voices low, women's high, children caught somewhere between. The walls trembled. The air vibrated. They sang as if to keep the night itself at bay. Didn't my Lord deliver Daniel? Then why not every man? That hymn carried through the window cracks, out across the fields, into the woods. Those who heard it from afar said it sounded like mourning and hope at once, like something older than any church, older than the land itself. When the singing ended, Miss Clara stayed behind, packing her books. Liza lingered by the door, watching the flame on the altar candle flicker. "You think we'll be all right?" she asked quietly. Miss Clara smiled, the kind of smile made of faith, not certainty. "We've come too far not to be." Outside, the night deepened. Cicadas hummed. The moon rose full, pale, heavy, watchful. From the levee, a faint sound drifted like hooves, or maybe just the river shifting. No one spoke of it. But that night, Liza dreamed of footsteps. She dreamed of her husband walking through the fog, calling her name. When she woke, the lamp had gone out, and the air felt colder than it should. Days became weeks. The summer ripened. The harvest neared. The town of Scott seemed steady, alive, determined. But cracks had begun to show. A mule went missing. A field caught fire one evening, burning too fast to be natural. Someone found a letter nailed to the chapel door, unsigned, but written in a heavy hand. "You forgot your place." Miss Clara tore it down before dawn. No one spoke of it again. But the songs changed. They grew quieter, slower, as if everyone knew the melody, but no longer trusted the ending. One afternoon, Samuel ran home from the fields, eyes wide. He said he saw riders near the road, 5 or 6, wearing cloth over their faces. His mother told him it was just his imagination, dust and sun playing tricks. But that night she kept the lamp burning until morning. The days pressed on. The bureau men stopped visiting. The mail stopped coming. Then one morning, no one could find Miss Clara. Her cabin door hung open, her books still on the table. The chalkboard in the schoolhouse was blank, except for one line written faintly: "Keep the light." They searched the woods, the levee, the riverbank. No trace. Some said she left for Jackson. Others whispered she never left at all. That evening, the people gathered at the chapel again. No sermon, no song, only the sound of the wind through the cracks. Liza sat with her son holding his hand, staring at the candle that refused to stay lit. Outside, a storm was building, black clouds rising from the horizon, wind twisting the grass flat. The first thunder rolled deep and distant. Someone murmured, "The Lord testing us." Another said, "It ain't the Lord this time." And then the rain began, sheets of it hammering the roofs, flooding the road, drowning the lanterns. The sky flashed white, then red, then black again. Voices shouted. Children cried. Horses screamed somewhere far off. The sound swallowed everything, the singing, the prayers, the very breath of the town. When dawn came, the rain was gone. The air smelled of wet ash. The creek had risen, but not enough to drown the cabins. Still, something had changed. The road to Greenville was gone, washed clean like a line erased. The schoolhouse door lay twisted in the mud, and in the fields, the cotton bolls glistened, not white now, but gray. That morning, no one spoke. They just stood in silence, waiting for something to move to break the spell. But nothing did. Only the wind, only the echo of a hymn that had no singer left to claim it. By dusk, the chapel bell rang one last time. No one pulled the rope, it just rang. And somewhere beneath the cotton sky, Miss Liza whispered, "The Lord let me see light." But the light she saw wasn't from the sun. They said it began with thunder, but not from the sky. It came from beneath, low, steady, like drums rolling through the soil. The elders called it the beating under the ground. Children woke that night and cried without knowing why. Dogs howled, then went silent. The moon was veiled, swollen, and dim, like an eye half shut in grief. Somewhere down by the creek, a light flickered unmoving, unblinking, neither fire nor lantern. And that's when Scott disappeared, not all at once. Not like the flood or the fire the county men would later claim. It vanished slowly, breath by breath, voice by voice. The Bureau reports long gone by then couldn't see it happen, but those who lived in nearby settlements remembered. In WPA interviews 60 years later, their voices trembled when they spoke of that night. One man named Ephraim Cole said, "It was like the Lord done turned his face away." And all that was left was the hum. He said he'd gone to Scott to trade seed the day before the storm. Found the place quiet, too quiet. The schoolhouse locked, the chapel dark, the field still. When he returned the next morning, there was nothing. No smoke from chimneys, no footprints in the mud. Just the hum, deep, steady, rising from the ground, like a heartbeat the earth couldn't bury. For decades, that's all anyone could agree on, the hum, the silence, the suddenness. But as years passed, pieces of the story began to surface, scattered like broken glass in the soil. In 1938, when Harold Fincher from the WPA compiled his notes, he found an old letter folded inside a hymnal from a church in Greenville. It was unsigned, dated August 1873. The ink bled through the page, but most of the words survived. We heard the riders before we saw the lights. They came from the North Road, 6 or 7, maybe more. No faces, just hoods and fire. The men hid their families in the chapel. Miss C said not to scream, said the Lord would hear us if the world would not. I saw them set fire to the school. I saw the sky turn red. And then the wind changed. The rest of the page is burned. Only half of a sentence remains, and the river sang. Fincher wrote in the margin, document authenticity uncertain, but handwriting consistent with female missionary reports of period. That Miss C, the one who told them not to scream, the one whose name vanished from records, the one the children sang for years later, it had to be Miss Clara. And yet there are no burial records, no obituaries, no graves. The county death rolls for 1873. Skip that entire summer, the clerk's handwriting jumps from June to October, leaving July blank. On the next page, a faint note in pencil records, lost by water damage. But the Mississippi River hadn't flooded that year. Something or someone wanted that silence kept. Folklore filled what fact refused. Some said the riders never made it home, that after they set the fires, the levee broke without warning. The earth opened and took them in, swallowed by the same mud they'd soaked with blood. Others said the storm wasn't a storm at all, that it came up from the ground, not down from the sky. That the wind carried voices and the rain fell like ash. Years later, farmers who plowed those fields said their mules would stop suddenly at the same spot, hooves trembling, eyes wide. They'd stand there listening, as if something beneath the soil still moved. But the strangest thing came in 1901, when a surveyor from Jackson mapped the new levee lines. His logbook, preserved in the state archives, shows coordinates that don't exist anymore. He wrote, "At mile marker 47, encountered old foundation brick and pine. Ground vibrates slightly underfoot. Locals refuse to work past dusk." One woman said, "You digging on God's heartbeat." He left the site before finishing his work. In his final note, he wrote only, "The air hums, hear not wind." Decades passed. The Delta changed again. New farms, new names, same earth. But the stories persisted. People swore the ground in Scotts Bend never stayed quiet. Radios brought near it in the 1940s, crackled without cause, static layered over faint voices, fragments of melody. No one could explain it. And then in 1976, a photographer from Memphis named Raymond Ellis came looking for what he called the ghost towns of Reconstruction. He'd heard of Scott through a blues musician who said, "Don't go down that road when the sun low. That land still sing." Ellis ignored the warning. He drove to Washington County, parked near the old levee, and took a single photograph before his camera jammed. When he developed it later, the image showed a flat expanse. No houses, no trees, just tall grass and mist. But in the center of the frame, faint and blurred, were 7 shapes. Human-sized, standing, facing the camera. He never returned. The photo archived at the University of Mississippi carries the note, "Exposure anomaly, possible double image." But those who've seen it in person say something else, that the figures are too clear to be a trick of light, and too still to be alive. It is easy to dismiss legends when you have paper and proof. But sometimes the paper lies, and the proof fades faster than memory. The farther historians dig, the more the story of Scott resists explanation. The bureau ledgers vanish. The maps lose their marks. The county clerk's handwriting shifts mid-page, as if a new hand took over. Even Fincher's WPA notebook ends abruptly, half a sentence left hanging. "The boy led me to the clearing, said he heard the hymn again, said they don't rest, That's it." The next page blank. The microfilm copy kept at the Library of Congress shows faint water stains, circular as if a drop had fallen repeatedly in the same spot. But the original missing. There's a pattern here, the same rhythm that beats beneath every erased black town in the South. Freedmen build. Hope rises. Paper documents. Then silence. Then rumor. Then ghost. But with Scott, the silence feels different, alive, deliberate. A silence that breathes back. In 2003, a team from Delta State University conducted ground-penetrating radar on what they believed to be the original site. Beneath the topsoil, they found a void, an anomaly roughly the size of a town square. The readings showed traces of charcoal brick and something else, a frequency too consistent to be natural vibration. When they ran the audio filters, they caught a faint tone, low, rhythmic, almost like a hum. The technician described it in his notes. Frequency irregular, but repeats every 9.6 seconds. Not seismic, not mechanical. He ended the report with one line, "Feels human." That recording still exists, though few have listened to it twice. Those who do say it sounds like a hymn underwater. No words, just breath rising and falling, like someone still working, still moving, still trying to finish what history refused to write down. Maybe that's what Aunt Cora meant when she said she sang to keep the ghosts working, not wandering. Maybe she wasn't speaking in metaphor. Maybe she meant that the ones who built Scott, who tilled its soil, who sang its hymns, who dreamed its freedom, never stopped. History closed the book. But the earth kept writing. Somewhere under those acres of cotton and thyme, a pulse remains. Not superstition, not story, something else. Something like justice still waiting to be named. If you go there now on a July evening when the light turns copper and the air hangs heavy, the land looks empty. The road dead ends at the levee. Grass waves, insects hum. Nothing moves. And yet, if you stand still long enough, the quiet begins to change. You feel it first through your feet, that low vibration, faint but steady. You tell yourself it's the river, the current, the machinery, the wind. But then it syncs with your breath, your heartbeat. You realize it's not around you, it's beneath you. A sound that isn't sound at all. Just the echo of labor, of life, of loss, repeating through the years. And you remember the words written in that half-burned letter the river sang. Maybe it still does. Because the night the maps went blank, the night the ink stopped flowing, the story didn't end. It just changed tongues. The Bureau wrote reports. The county wrote claims. The scholars wrote footnotes. But the land wrote a hymn, and it's still singing, softly, steadily, beneath the cotton sky. Morning comes slow in the Delta, slower than anywhere else. The mist doesn't rise, it drifts like it's searching for what it lost. Dew clings to the grass where once stood cabins, and the wind slides through empty space that used to hold voices. The ground here breathes differently, heavy, uneven, as if something beneath still stirs. No town stands at Scott anymore. No road sign, no marker, no monument. On the maps, the bend is nameless, a patch of lowland between levee and field. But if you talk to the people who live near it, the farmers, the elders, the ones who've worked that soil for generations, they'll tell you. They still don't plant there. They call it the quiet acre. They say the ground remembers. One woman, a descendant of the Carters, said she once tried. She plowed half a row and her tractor stalled. She heard a low vibration in the seat, like a heartbeat through steel. She left the rest untouched. Ain't nothing grow there but memory, she said. There are still stories too many to count, too strange to disprove. A fisherman claims he saw lights dancing over the water, steady and white, like lanterns that refused to burn out. A boy walking home from school swears he heard voices humming from the ditch line, voices that rose and fell like the rhythm of a work song. Some nights, the church bells in Greenville ring once at dusk, though no one pulls the rope. And every few years, someone new comes, looking historians, journalists, students. They arrive with notebooks and recorders full of certainty. They walk the fields, collect the names, measure the soil. They leave with more questions than they came with. Because how do you explain a place that lived and worked and sang, yet left almost nothing behind? One scholar from Jackson State tried to map the settlement using satellite imagery. When she overlaid the old coordinates on the new terrain, she found an outline faint, geometric, like the ghost of a town square. But the lines wouldn't stay still. Each time she adjusted the resolution, they shifted just slightly, as if the land itself refused to be pinned down. Maybe that's the lesson Scott left behind, that memory cannot be owned. That freedom once sung never stops echoing. That you can burn homes, drown fields, erase names. But you cannot silence the hum. In 1999, a gospel group from the Delta recorded a song called Ashes of Scott. No one knew who wrote it. The lyrics are simple, almost a whisper. They said the river carried them home. They said the night turned them to song. And when the dawn forgot their names, the earth kept singing on. The track was recorded on a single microphone in a wooden church under a tin roof. You can hear the wind slipping through the boards, the hum of insects outside, the rhythm of feet tapping the floor. You can't tell where the voices end and the room begins. And if you listen with your eyes closed, it sounds like more than a choir. It sounds like a congregation that never stopped singing. The last living voice connected to Scott, an old man named Ezekiel Brown, born 1898, was interviewed in 1987. He was a child when his grandfather told him about the town that the river took. Ezekiel said, "Granddaddy told me don't ever walk that way after sundown. He said you'll hear him, the one still working. He said the Lord didn't take him. History did." He paused, then a long silence on the tape, and added, "But the Lord let him stay to finish the work." When the interviewer asked what that work was, Ezekiel just laughed softly, the kind of laugh that sounds like a prayer. "To remind us," he said, "that freedom ain't a gift. It's a ghost, it'll haunt you till you honor it." Now, more than a century later, that ghost still lingers in song, in silence, in the vibration underfoot. The soil carries it. The wind hums it. Even the cotton, when it blooms, bends slightly toward the levee, as if listening for a voice. Every erased black town in the South carries a story like this. Some burned, some flooded, some were bought and buried under new names. But Scott is different. Scott didn't vanish from fire or water. It vanished from ink, from attention, from permission to exist. Yet here we are, still talking about it. Maybe that's what survival looks like. When the world forgets you to live as an echo so persistent that silence itself begins to speak your name. Because when you say Scott, Mississippi aloud, the air changes a little. The word hums against your tongue, low and steady, like a chord half sung. It's not history, it's presence, it's testimony. The people who built this place are long gone, but the story they left behind still breathes. In the rhythm of hammers, in the hush between two hymns, in the sound of rain against tin. That's the legacy of the forgotten towns, the ones carved from courage, erased by fear, reclaimed by time. They remind us that the past is never really past. It sleeps lightly, waiting for someone to call its name. So tonight, wherever you are, say it once quietly, like prayer, like promise. Scott, let the word linger on your breath. Let it hum in the air. Let it find the others. And when the silence answers back, when you feel that low vibration in your chest, remember, it's not haunting. It's remembering. Because some stories don't die. They keep walking beside us, step for step, until we finally listen. You've just heard a chapter from a history that never closed. Before you go, leave a comment where you're watching from. Tell me if your town has its own silence, its own hum that never fades. Tell me if you've ever stood somewhere that felt empty, but not alone. And if you listen close enough tonight, maybe, just maybe, you'll hear it too. The hum beneath the cotton, the song that never ends, the echo of Scott, Mississippi.